I'm Mark Ryan, and I'll be teaching a course this coming week, actually, on Joseph Campbell. It's an overview of his entire output over a very long career. But it's to acquaint people essentially with his perspective on the world. Joseph Campbell faced with, I think, a really impressive personal depth, a modern situation that we are all in that's unprecedented, which is to say that throughout human history, cultures have been predominantly local. We grow up in a particular place, we accept the worldview of that locale with its particular myths and perspectives. And we think of it as an absolute truth in general. And that has been true in human cultures throughout the world until modern times, when we find that all of these cultures are coming together and they are clashing with one another, but at the same time, learning much from one another. And it's that facing that pluralism that I think he's done as effectively as anyone in our times. He had an interest very early on Native American lore with a very different view of the world, a very nature-based view. He was steeped in the Western classics. He studied medieval legends, and on a graduate level, he became absorbed in Eastern thought, Hindu and Buddhist approaches, and he got very interested quite early in the 20th century in the modernist literature and the radical perspectives that were emerging from the West. So he had a tremendously broad perspective on different human approaches to life. And the question is, what do we do with that? Because we see that our own particular worldviews that we've grown up with are relative, that they're competing views all over that really work for people in putting them into contact with the deepest level of their own lives. We reconcile all of these different perspectives. Well, that's a peculiar modern issue that I think Joe Campbell faced with great personal depth. He really went on an effort to, following his own intuitions, to confront that with in a way that we can all learn from. And so depth psychology, he discovered when he was studying in Germany in the 1920s. And that, he thought, gave him a key to understanding these very different perspectives from all over the world. And it allowed him to approach it in a way that it had never been approached before, but which allowed us to see a validity to all of those different perspectives if we reframe our approach to them, not as history, not as absolute truth, but rather as symbols with which we can understand life that's beyond rational understanding. Trying to understand these things in a way that just didn't look at them from afar as somebody else's way of viewing the world, but trying to understand how they could really work for anyone, and certainly work in their own cultures. And that sent him on a personal quest that carried him beyond the normal academic definition of the normal professional definition of academic field. So he did it in a way that was quite maverick. He studied for a PhD, but then gave it up because he thought it was too directed. And he just took 5 years on his own to read the classics without that kind of external direction, following his own intuitions about what was most deeply of interest to him. And out of that kind of personal authenticity, I think he constructs a humanistic vision that's quite instructive for many of us, particularly in our own times when we are, when much of our society would define themselves as spiritual but not religious. That is to say, as believing deeply in some kind of spiritual realm, or striving to experience, better said, some kind of a spiritual realm, but doing it in a way that is of unique value to that person personally. That it has to be, the search has to be guided by each of us individually in a way that's particularly meaningful to us as individuals, and not simply falling in with a particular communal outlook. Well, I can identify with his personal quest, I think, in numerous ways. Like him, I grew up in this world of Irish Catholicism, which, as he mentions at various points, was an extremely powerful vision, especially when it's taught in schools and in communities where everyone shares those beliefs and those doctrines. And that's when that hits you very early, it's quite formative. And I feel that he really feels that he can trace his own interest in mythology back to that experience. Yet it wasn't suitable for him for a long term. And the same has been true for me, which is to say, he felt that he could not live with those doctrines when he saw other systems throughout the world that had very valuable views, in some ways that perhaps more suited for our modern times, in some ways perhaps less, but he saw that there were truths to learn from the full spectrum of human outlooks on reality. And that, I've always been drawn to that very broad view of things. Both he and I were somewhat mavericks within the academic world. He decided not to pursue his PhD. He taught at Sarah Lawrence College, where the teaching emphasis was quite different. And where, as he said, the students really wanted to know what was meaningful in their own lives. And much of my career was as a teacher and dean of students, in which I was really trying to aid students to bring out the most powerful aspects of their own unique vision and not impose some particular outlook on them that I might share, or that was a particularly popular outlook in the academic world at the moment. I also felt like I have a certain sympathy for his effort throughout his career to find the commonalities in human experience. We live in an academic world now where much of the emphasis is on the difference in different cultures, and almost to the point of dogma. And yet, having lived abroad myself for 15 years, functioned in another language. And I really feel that life works more smoothly when you can also look for the commonalities and when you can feel and empathize with the common aspects of life that you face with people from very different cultures and outlooks. So that is, he made a lifelong quest of that search for commonalities, and I think did that really with extraordinary erudition and bringing to bear a tremendous amount of knowledge of the world's cultures. In this particular course, what we're doing is trying to get a grasp of his full career and the major insights throughout that career. But the framing of it is his own personal quest. My feeling is that even though he spoke about creating a science of mythology early on, what he did in the end was not so much a science as really a very significant humanistic endeavor. And he was trying to answer questions that he himself could live with in a way that he himself could live with them. And it was that deep personal search of his own that we're trying to shine a light on.